The big sort of marketing play that also happens to not just be a marketing play, but something very special for me is our partnership with Avocado High School. So in South Auckland School, we've partnered with and
hey, Jack,
sold, we gift a pair.
All out of time.
It's pretty cool.
I'm going to sneak in that website again. That is spiritshoes.store. Kia ora, Jack, and best of luck to you. And Peter Dunn, Heather Roy, thank you for being with us this Monday. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Wallace.
I'm Wallace Chapman. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, see you later.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, more overseas seasonal workers are on the way, but fruit growers are picking. It's a little more complicated than that. What price for love? For some people, it's their entire disability allowance gone. Pizza and a lie down, Dame Valerie's reward for winning bronze and completing her medal set. The fresh-faced shot putter whose future appears so bright, she might need to keep the shades. And the Belarusian sprinter running from her own country. Is it time to roll down the drawbridge as New Zealand moves to the next stage in our COVID recovery? And it's not easy being green and thirsty. The avocados soaking up Northland water.
RNZ News at 5, I'm Marama Tipole. The government is opening one-way quarantine-free travel with Tonga, Samoa and Vanuatu from September to bolster the RSE workforce. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government has heard calls from the primary sector to let more seasonal workers in and now thinks it's safe to do so.
Cabinet has made the decision to work to open up one-way quarantine-free travel to New Zealand from Samoa, Tonga and Vanuatu for RSE workers, without having to use the MIQ system. While there may not be travel from all three immediately, we're working towards this opening up in September.
Jacinda Ardern says the new policy will usher recognise seasonal employer workers into New Zealand before peak demand in February and March next year. Tonga has reported no cases of COVID-19, while Samoa's 1 and Tonga and Vanuatu's 4 cases have all been at the border with no community transmission. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern will next week set out details of plans to open the country's borders. A spokesperson says advice from a group of experts on how to open the border safely will be publicly released on August the 12th. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher.
After the advice is made public, Ms Ardern will then announce future changes to the border and public health measures. The group of experts, led by epidemiologist Sir David Skegg, was set up in April to advise the government on crucial COVID-19 decisions, like how much of the population needs to be vaccinated before border settings can be relaxed. It's been examining vaccination rates, scenarios should the borders reopen, and public health protections.
Nurses say they've been blindsided by a District Health Board move to take them to court over strike action. The DHBs want the Employment Court to ensure they've guaranteed staffing levels to keep patients safe when nurses walk off the job. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
The nurses' organisation says it's shocked and surprised by the move because there were enough emergency staff in the last strike. But the DHB say some hospitals didn't know exactly who was rostered on until the night before, and they need more certainty. They're hoping the courts can require the nurses to give them that. The union says patient safety and safe staffing levels are at the heart of its overall dispute, so it's a bit rich of the District Health Boards to take court action on the matter for the strike day.
Hospital patients in Otago and Southland say nursing staff are doing their best while short-staffed. A report into its safe staffing regime says a shortage of nurses on Southern District Health Board wards is placing patients at risk of harm. Katie Simmons is on her 5th stay at Dunedin Hospital this year with her daughter who has underlying health issues. She says she can't fault the staff who have provided great care.
You could just tell that they were so busy, they were probably lucky if they were actually able to get a break. You can see the tired look on their faces and they're, doing their best. And what are they supposed to do? It must be really hard for them.
Katie Simmons says she's been helping to care for her daughter to ease the pressure on nursing staff. A health worker who was placed in a quarantine facility following a PPE protocol breach at Auckland's Middlemore Hospital has returned a negative test result for COVID-19. The Health Ministry says the staff member was isolated as a precaution because of UN official from Fiji with Delta variant is being treated at the hospital. It says the patient is in a stable condition in intensive care after being evacuated last week. The hospital worker remains asymptomatic and will undergo further testing in quarantine. The time is 5:04. To sport, weightlifter Laurel Hubbard will make history tonight when she becomes the first openly transgender woman athlete to compete at the Olympics. Both the Weightlifting Federation and the IOC have been at pains ahead of the competition to confirm her right to compete, and New Zealand Olympic Chief Executive Karen Smith says the global debate must be incredibly difficult for Hubbard.
Definitely think it can be dehumanising. I've certainly seen evidence of that in some of the comments that have been made. You know, people might have a view, but I think there's respectful ways that people can exercise their view. I think we have to be mindful that, you know, Laurel Hubbard is a person and she has feelings and she is eligible to do what she's doing here on the Olympic stage, and we wish her all the very best.
Meanwhile, Olympic champions Peter Burling and Blair Tuka are on course to again win Olympic gold. They lead the 49er category going into this evening's medal race. The evening medals are also up for grabs, with Tim Price fourth place in the individual and the teams also fourth, heading into the final show jumping phase. Two-time winner Lisa Carrington easily won her K1 200-metre canoe sprint event heat to advance to the semis. Carrington's chasing an unprecedented 4 gold medals, also contesting the K1 500, K2 500 and K4 500 events. She also advanced to the semi-finals of the K2 500 with Caitlin Regal, but Carrington told Sky Sport it was not without some trepidation.
It's been 2 years since we've raced internationally, so it was exciting to get out there, so nerve-wracking. Also, just I really wanted to know how the rest of the world was tracking, so it was cool to do what we did today.
And that's the news.
Political performances.
The slipping of the COVID halo, that overwhelming election result was driven by the COVID response. Some of the sheens come off that.
Olympic triumphs.
We did it, what it's taken to be here, travels up and down the country, being away from my children, that just all surfaced at that very moment.
New Zealand on the world stage.
We've got so many characters in our team. We know what they're really like. I'm just glad the rest of the world gets to see them as well.
Faster, higher and stronger. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Showers heavy for a time tomorrow with gales southwesterlies possibly severe. Waikato to Taumaranui, also Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Showers for a time tonight and tomorrow morning. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Rain developing tonight and overnight, turning to showers tomorrow and easing late. Marlborough north of the Kaikoura Ranges, Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain or showers spreading north today, with snow to 500 metres in Fiordland for a time, becoming fine tomorrow. For the remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury, rain developing overnight with snow to 400 metres, easing to isolated showers late tomorrow. Otago and Southland, rain and snow lowering to 500 metres, easing to occasional showers overnight, then clearing late tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain tonight. RNZ National, it's 5:07.
Kia ora rā e ho. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. RSE workers from Samoa, Tonga and Vanuatu will soon be allowed into the country quarantine-free. Te Pirimia, Jacinda Ardern, says there would normally be 10,000 RSE workers in New Zealand to help with the summer season. But she says because of the border closure, the horticulture sector is thousands of workers short. And Cabinet's hope is this arrangement will ease the pressure.
This policy will open up the ability for significantly more workers to enter the country to assist with an expected peak demand for workers in February and March of 2022. While we are currently bringing in 150 RSE workers every 16 days, this new one-way travel policy will significantly expand the potential workforce available for those experiencing labour shortages. We'll also have the potential to free up existing MIQ spaces set aside for RSE workers.
Te Piramia Jacinda Ardern says the risk that comes with opening the corridor is very low and workers would be tested when they arrive. Paul Painter is the General Manager of Yummy Fruits and says it's good news, but there are still some hoops to jump through.
The only problem is what you do as an employer is you get an approval to recruit. That is the right to employ these people. So they can't just wander in and start working in New Zealand. The employers need to get that paperwork done. And we have no approval to recruit, so we can't employ anybody as things stand.
Have they had any conversations with you about how quickly they can do that then?
No, I suspect this announcement after yesterday's bad poll result probably was in the works and has been advanced with a lack of detail because it's a good political move.
In terms of the workers, what are you going to be paying them? You don't have to pay for quarantine on this side, but they're going to have to quarantine when they go home. Who picks up the tab for that?
I think that's also unclear. Last year we got a deal where we were able to quarantine them in their villages, so the cost was relatively modest, but it just depends what rules this new Samoan government, for instance, is going to put in place.
And Paul, did you pay for that last time round?
Not a great deal, no.
Okay, and what about wages? Do they get the living wage?
Oh, yes, they do. They get far in excess of the living wage and have for years. In fact, in the peak of our season, I did the numbers the other day, the RSE workers are earning more than $7 an hour, more than the Kiwis, and that's based on their level of productivity. But the total cost of employing an RSE worker is north of $30 an hour.
So how many do you need?
Oh, well, I could use about 200. Last year we got 84. And even when you have a big number, we're still working, unbelievable hours. Our managers are doing 70-something hours a week and working far too hard. I would like to have a lot more RSE workers and work 40-hour weeks.
So the government's indicating that they reckon there's about 7,000 RSE workers currently here and that at peak season the industry needs about 10,000. Do you agree with those figures?
No, historically we've had close to 15,000 in New Zealand, and so 10,000 is a real struggle. We have to recognise that we're also missing the backpackers, who are about 30% of our usual harvest labour force, and also there's a huge employment issue in terms of availability of workers. Every hardware store and supermarket and cafe has got a sign up. The local cafe I go to is closed on the weekends because it's got no staff.
So could you put a number on how many you need across the industry, do you think?
Well, I would have thought it's north of the 15,000 we historically had in 2019, and probably with the growth in our industry, it's more like 20,000. We've grown from $300 million to $900 million in a decade. So big growth, and all of that investment in growth is based on 15 years of a stable labour policy with RSE workers. And so this uncertainty we've experienced in the last couple of years has really taken the confidence out of the industry.
Paul, you would appreciate that some people raise the issue of poor wages, long hours with RSE workers, and, well, the allegation that the reason you want them is they're not as much trouble as Kiwi workers and you can pay them less. What do you say to that?
Well, it's absolutely not true. As I said, I've done the numbers. I've got them for anybody to look at. We're paying them more than $7 an hour more than the Kiwis, based on their productivity. They don't take up houses because most RSE workers are in specialist RSE accommodation that's been built over the years. And so it's completely untrue. More than that, the impact on the communities in the Pacific is enormous. These guys in Samoa, their local resort is shut down, and their two big foreign exchange earners are RSE workers and tourism, and they're both pretty well dead. So everybody over there is saying, please take our workers because we don't know how we're going to put food on the table. So we can either give them a job or we can send over a bucket of aid.
You've indicated, Paul, that the devil's basically in the detail here. OK to get them across the border, but you need all the paperwork to get them working. So what's your deadline? When do you really need these people up and running by?
Well, we're big stone fruit growers, so we normally have our first tranche of them arrive in November. We have got a trickle of workers coming down next month from the kiwi fruit industry because they're running out of work for them then. But certainly with the labour shortage in Hawke's Bay, we could use some people tomorrow.
Paul Painter there, General Manager of Yummy Fruits. Homai Avocado, we'd love your feedback on this one. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. We are bringing in more RSE workers. Prime Minister's just announced it. It is a one-way travel corridor. So coming here, they will not have to do managed isolation and quarantine. And what about other sectors? Send me your thoughts. Pātui mai, text me on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 14 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai. Thanks for listening. E Heidi Akine, the young shot putter with a bright future. Pressure is mounting on the government to review its MIQ booking processes to make it easier for those in exceptional circumstances to come home. Those who have travelled for medical reasons want an assurance they'll get a spot upon return, saying it's not fair they're subject to the same lottery system as everyone else. Emma Hatton reports.
A stem cell transplant is blood cancer patient David Willett's last option. At the weekend, he and his sister, who was his donor, boarded a plane for Singapore to undergo the potentially life-extending procedure. But despite trying for over a month to secure a spot in MIQ to come home via, they've had to head off without knowing when they can return.
It's certainly very stressful, and people with fatal diseases and illnesses are under an enormous amount of stress as it is, without that big question mark of will I be able to get home.
He's fairly sure he will qualify for an emergency allocation spot. However, the prospects for his sister under the same grounds are less sure. He says something needs to change.
Scope for looking at people with fatal illnesses who are travelling for treatment to have some recognition for them. And I'm sure there are other special groups that would argue that they have very valid grounds to have something better than a lottery system for returning to New Zealand.
The National Party's spokesperson for the pandemic response, Chris Bishop, says people forced overseas for medical reasons need certainty they will have a spot in MIQ on their return.
I think there is capacity in the system to allow that. MIQ is pretty rammed at the moment, but on any ordinary week, there are hundreds of rooms that go vacant on any single day. And of course, we should be using those rooms if we possibly can to allow people in this situation to come back.
Another New Zealander stuck in limbo is Frances. She went to Sydney earlier this year for family reasons, but ended up having to undergo emergency surgery. Her flight home was cancelled amidst the surge of COVID-19 cases, and her request to be on a government-managed flight home was also declined. She feels completely let down.
I've handled a few things in my time, and this is right at the top. This is taking me past the point of being able to cope, really.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, told TVNZ there are changes that could be made.
I think now is the time to go back and look at whether or not we should be notifying of releases. For instance, in July, we did a very large one, 3,500 vouchers all at once went out. So even notifying large releases like that. So that is something the Minister is looking at.
350 rooms per fortnight are set aside for those who need to travel urgently, although people can only apply within 14 days of wanting to return and must be willing to leave within 7 days of making an application. An MIQ spokesperson says anyone can make an application, but it should only be as a last resort.
The government says there are 340 MIQ places available for people who need a space for exceptional circumstances. The COVID-19 Minister, Chris Hipkins, says he's seeking more advice from officials on how they can help people who need a room for emergency reasons. It is 17 minutes past 5. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Nurses and their bosses are heading to the courts over strike action as both accuse each other of not doing enough to keep patients safe. About 30,000 District Health Board nurses have issued a formal strike notice for August the 19th. DHBs have retaliated by taking them to the Employment Court, saying they're not doing enough to guarantee safe staffing on strike day. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
Nurses say they've been blindsided. Despite weeks of critical negotiations, union advocate David Waite says this is the first they've heard about court action.
I think the fact that they've done this in a surprise move is probably an indication that they are not treating the relationship with the respect that it deserves.
DHBs deny the move signals a rapid decline in the relationship, which just a couple of weeks ago was looking relatively rosy. A July strike was called off for talks to continue, but when it came to voting on a new contract, nurses gave a resounding no. DHB spokesperson, Tairāwhiti DHB Chief Executive Jim Green, says they're simply seeking clarification from the court on the rules for emergency cover in a strike. Under the law, nurses have to provide emergency cover, but the DHBs want them to lock in names and numbers.
We just absolutely need to be certain that once we've agreed those staffing requirements around life-preserving services, that the names of the people who will be providing that will be rostered and we'll be able to approach those if necessary.
But the nurses' organisation's David Waite says cover was locked in for the last strike, so he's baffled by the court action. He reckons the move is a bit rich, given nurses are striking because their contracts don't guarantee safe staffing levels in their jobs every day.
To see them then pointing the finger at NZNO members who genuinely care about patient safety is just shocking.
But Mr Green says the strike staffing issue is completely different and it's about making sure patients are safe on the day. Both sides say they want to resolve matters before the strike, but nurses say the court action and delays by the DHBs mean time is running out for that.
Disabled people in relationships are paying the price of love, losing their allowances because they're coupled up. MSD assumes people in relationships share their finances, but for people with a disability, that means expensive medical costs are no longer covered. Couples say it's wrong. They should be weighing up whether their relationship is worth the hit to their pocket. Anei te kairipoata, Eloise Tanuth.
Being in a relationship has been costly for Amy Bradley and her husband Pete. She has muscular dystrophy and can't work. He has dwarfism but works full-time. When she declared their relationship to MSD, her disability allowance and supported living benefits were cancelled weeks before he even moved in. That's because he earns slightly more than the $1,031 weekly limit, and it's left him with a hefty bill for her needs.
For my husband to have to buy, incontinence products for me and back then it was quite all embarrassing.
What was covered by her benefit, now gone.
Well, I've got no St John's alarm because we just can't afford that per week. Yeah, we're very careful regarding heating and our power because I have a lot of medical equipment that runs off power, so I won't go to the doctors as much as probably what I should.
She says the process has left her guilt-ridden. How did this make you feel when you were stripped of all of those benefits?
Like I'm not equal in any part of my relationship. I'm an absolute burden on my husband. Being married doesn't cure disability.
She says it's wrong that couples should have to weigh up whether it's worth it to be together. But she's happy with her decision.
Yeah, it's been awful, but I wouldn't give this up for anything now. Being married, and it's great.
It's a similar situation for Alistair Gregory, who has spina bifida, and his wife, Carly. They've been together 7 years, but since they declared their relationship, they've lost their benefits.
In my experience, I don't think that's fair because what is the difference between two people and one person? Still both got to live, got to pay rent, got to pay bills, all that sort of thing.
Alistair works about 30 hours a week whilst also studying. His wife's studying and looking for a job with no luck. They get $110 each week from MSD, but it's temporary support and not classed as a benefit. That leaves them in a tight situation.
Luckily, we do have some parental support sometimes, but if that wasn't there, we would be struggling.
2 years ago, the Welfare Advisory Group recommended the government reassess what they define as a relationship for disabled and non-disabled couples. Dr. Huhana Hickey was part of the group. She's disabled and has been through a similar experience. Her partner gave up working to become her full-time carer so she wouldn't lose her disability benefits.
And that's ridiculous. Why should they have to lose the dignity of receiving she chose to be poor with me rather than to go out there and live life and, have a chance for a better income.
She says the assumption that a partner will automatically support them needs to change. And for disabled people that can work to support themselves, they're often offered a job in a different city where there's no accessible housing.
So if you get a job in Wellington and you can't get a house in Wellington, you can't get that job. So you see, if one area is broken, it breaks everything down. And so you're living not your best life. You're not necessarily living where you prefer to live.
She's pushing for people with disabilities to have a seat at Parliament's table.
Unless we get our own entity, our own legal entity, led by About and For, that oversees policy, defines laws, puts a disability voice in there, nothing is going to get better for us. It's simply because we are getting able bodies are making the decisions for us, and they're failing us to a crisis level.
In a statement, MSD says they're required to take all income received by someone's partner into account when assessing someone's benefits. Checkpoint also approached Minister of Social Development and Disability Issues Carmel Sepuloni for comment. In a statement, she says a range of recommendations have been made regarding income support for disabled people. Work is underway looking at the definition of relationships for disabled and non-disabled beneficiaries. More advice will be coming as part of the Welfare Overhaul program later this year. It couldn't come soon enough for these couples who have felt the sting for years.
And let us know what you think of that one, homai or whakaaro. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Should people who are getting disability allowances and medical expenses covered, well, should that be dependent on who they're coupled up with, or should they be assessed as an independent person? Let us know your thoughts. An Olympic sprinter from Belarus is refusing to fly home, citing fears for her safety after she criticised her coaches. She was due to compete in the women's 200-metre event, but complained on social media about being entered into another race at short notice. World Watch's Max Toll has more.
Kristina Szymanowskaya says Belarusian officials forced her to pack her bags and took her to the airport against her will. But at the terminal, she sought protection from police, which was apparently granted. The official excuse for removing Szymanowskaya was due to her emotional and psychological condition. State media criticised her for lacking team spirit. But while at the airport, she posted this video message on Facebook.
I asked the International Olympic Committee for help. I was put under pressure and they are trying to forcibly take me out of the country without my consent.
She's since met with IOC officials and more senior police and is believed to be considering asylum somewhere in Europe. The head of Belarus's Olympic Committee is the son of President Alexander Lukashenko, a notorious authoritarian leader, and many believe the athlete's life is still in danger. Here's opposition MP Pavel Letishko.
Because the Belarusian athlete Kristina Szymanowskaya criticised the Belarusian national team for their violation of the rules and procedures for athletes participating in the Olympic Games, it is important to help our Belarusian citizen who merely expressed an opinion.
For almost a year in Belarus, there have been mass demonstrations against a seemingly rigged presidential election. Government forces have brutally cracked down on protesters and anyone critical of the government, and President Lukashenko's rival, who many believe would have won the election, has had to flee the country. Tadeusz Skichan is a Belarusian journalist based in Warsaw.
All the athletes, all the national team athletes who openly criticize the regime or the regime's actions, they have already been kicked out of the national team already. And they have formed the union, the Free Union of Belarusian Athletes, which now operates in exile.
As for Kristina Szymanowskaya, several countries, including the Czech Republic and Poland, have said they are ready to offer her a visa and protection.
A future so bright she may need to keep wearing shades. Shot putter Maddison-Lee Wesche placed 6th in her final and also delivered a PB of 18.98 metres. The 22-year-old Aucklander chucked on a pair of sunnies for her third throw in the shot put final and appeared to be as cool as a cucumber.
That was the plan. My team and I, we talked about our game plan before going in, and one of the main points was staying relaxed, staying happy, and just flowing in the circle.
How do you do that, though? Because it's a lot of pressure, right?
It takes a bit of practice to get there, but we'd done some comps in Aussie beforehand, and that was the same mentality going in, and that worked. I got some PBs over there as well, so why not use it again?
Tell me about the sunglasses.
They may be my lucky charm from now on and an essential part of the comp kit. But, I train with them every day, or most times that I'm sewing, because it's pretty sunny in Auckland most of the time. But, they just, maybe they're a bit of a comfort thing for me.
So, did you decide at a certain point, okay, I'm just going to put them on?
Yeah, I got to my third throw and I realised that the girl in front of me just knocked me out of 8th position, and I was like, it's go time. You gotta do something great right now.
And so, chucking on those glasses, does it put you in the zone somehow? Does it take you to another place?
Possibly, yeah. Maybe it took me back to feeling a little bit like I was at home and at a training with my mum and my sisters and both my coaches around. So yeah, it was a little bit getting in that zone.
So, speaking of home, who was watching you, and have you managed to have a chat with them since?
Yeah, I have. Mum and my 3 sisters and my grandparents were at home watching, and I know they were screaming at the TV and telling me to throw the shot back all the way to NZ. So, yeah, they were happy, and a bunch of friends and wider family were all after the TV.
So, competing with all these people around you, including Dame Valerie, right? And, hey, Raven Saunders with the masks. What did you make of that?
I have my glasses and she has her mask. Everybody needs their little bit of something special, and if that helps her get, a silver medal, then she does her thing.
What was it like for you? Because, Dame Valerie this is her 5th Olympics, right? And you're there for the first time. What is it like to be around someone like Dame Valerie, to share that experience and to be there, obviously, when she got the bronze?
It's really crazy. You hear about it on the radio and you see it on the TV because, you watch all these Olympics before you get here, and it's kind of surreal and really special that I was able to be not only in Tokyo but out on the field to see her throw the bronze medal shot.
What do you reckon is next for you?
A little bit of a break. I haven't had one for maybe 2 years haven't had a break for 2 years, so I'll take a couple of weeks off and then straight back to throwing.
Madison, I hope you're not talking about a couple of weeks off in MIQ. Are you going to get a couple of weeks in addition to that?
Maybe 1 or 2, but I love throwing too much to stop.
And that was Maddison-Lee Wesche. E te iwi e haere nei I a checkpoint. The Prime Minister will soon reveal her roadmap out of COVID. So how do we lower the drawbridge to the rest of the world? Successive governments get a serve for a massive human rights failure, delivering affordable and healthy homes. And we're live to Tokyo for the latest Games news. Homai o Avocado. Let us know your thoughts on the new travel corridor that the government's announced this afternoon. So no MIQ for RSE workers heading from Samoa and other places coming here for the season. Good idea. Why or why not? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for the headlines now. Ko Marama anō tēnei.
Kia ora. The Prime Minister says there will be very low risk from opening a one-way corridor for workers from 3 Pacific Islands countries. RSE workers from Samoa, Tonga and Vanuatu will soon be allowed into the country quarantine-free. Ms Ardern says because of the COVID-19 border closure, the horticulture sector is thousands of workers short, and Cabinet's hope this arrangement will ease the pressure. Workers would be tested when they arrive. Paul Painter, the General Manager of Yummy Fruit Company, told Checkpoint it's good news. He says the decision may have been in the pipeline, but suspects it's also politically driven by a drop in support for Labour and has been brought forward. Mr Painter says his company alone could use about 200 RSE workers and last year had 84. The Nurses Organisation says it has been blindsided and left shocked by a District Health Board move to take them to court over strike action. The DHBs want the Employment Court to ensure they have guaranteed staffing levels to keep patients safe when nurses walk off the job. The Canterbury DHB is tonight urging people not to use the Christchurch Hospital Emergency Department unless their condition is urgent. It says the department is extremely busy because of a significant number of patients combined confined, with staff being absent through illness. People with life-threatening emergencies should call 111 as usual, but people with non-urgent conditions should contact their own general practice first. A disabled woman says the benefit system needs an overhaul after losing her allowances since being in a relationship. Amy Bradley has muscular dystrophy and her partner earns slightly over the $1,031 weekly limit. When she declared their relationship to MSD, her disability allowance and supported living benefits were cancelled weeks before he even moved in. She told Checkpoint her medical needs are not being met. Those are the latest headlines. I'll have more news at 6.
Thanks, Marama. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Kei kone a Nona Peltier, mina kaupapa kai Pakehi. Nona is here to talk all things business. Okay. United States investor planning to buy the Australian and New Zealand buy now, pay later company. This is Afterpay, right?
Right, so we've heard of Afterpay.
Yeah.
It's one of the big ones. And so a company called Square, it's a digital payment service and it's based in the United States. And it's run by a fellow named Jack Dorsey, who is a co-founder of Twitter. And he decided that he would like to buy Afterpay, and he's offered the equivalent of 126 Australian dollars per share. Now that's $39 billion Australian, or about 41.5 billion New Zealand dollars. It's a really big offer. However, it's not a cash deal. He'd be offering shares in his company, and so Afterpay investors would end up owning about 18% of this new entity.
That is really interesting. Okay. Let's move on to the winemaker, Villa Maria Estate. It's been sold. So who's snatched that up?
Well, the owners of Villa Maria had been in receivership, so that put the company on the block. And it's a company, it's a New Zealand company. It's called now I just make sure the pronunciation is right, in Devon. And it's basically one that we've maybe never heard of, because they export almost all of the wine that's produced in New Zealand. And they own wineries and vineyards all across the country. They export primarily, and they're the biggest producer in New Zealand, and they're exporting most of their wines to the UK, for example, and then repackage it under a grocery brands. One of the two brands, one is called Cowrie Bay and the other is Tiki Ridge. Neither I've heard of, but they are apparently big brands in the UK. And so they bought the business for an undisclosed sum. We don't know what they paid for it, but some Australian reports suggested that Villa Maria was worth about $200 million.
Okay. Let's make like the prices and gallop around the markets.
Let's do that. So, look, we did pretty well. We almost always move in line with the Australian market, which was boosted by this offer. So we rose 0.9%. That's 108 points up to 12,703. And our dollar is slightly down, but that's mostly because of the US dollar strength always. We're at 69.6 US cents, 94.9 Australian, which is steady where we've been for a while, and 50.1 pence.
No, just before we move on, Olympic commentary, which I know is one of your specialty subjects.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so before we go, if you could have any, your Olympic specialty, what would it be? Don't be confined to the current available events.
Well, I like ice hockey.
There you go.
It's not this season, though.
Okay.
It's all wrong.
All right. Good one, Nona. Thank you, Nona. That's Nona with Business. Now, time to move away from reactive isolationist response and lower the drawbridge to the outside world, according to one health expert. In an editorial for the Internal Medicine Journal, Auckland University Professor of Medicine Des Gorman argues for a dedicated pandemic response agency as we move to the next phase of our COVID recovery. The agency would develop a pandemic plan, border and quarantine management, tracing and isolation capacity. While next week the Prime Minister will reveal her thinking around border restrictions and how the vaccination rollout could change that. But right now we're joined by Professor Des Gorman. Hi Des. So, how would a pandemic agency help us lower the drawbridge to the outside world?
Oh, good evening, Lisa. The answer is that you have an agency who has competency in governance and has competency in governance around the issues which matter, which include supply chain, logistics. And in the case of vaccination, for example, you would have an agency which oversees the distribution of vaccination through primary care networks, Maori Health networks, iwi, and so on. We've had a vaccination rollout, Lisa, which has not gone well, and especially not gone well in terms of vulnerable people. And the irony is that the general practitioners, the iwi groups, the PHOs know exactly who the vulnerable community are. They know how to access them. They're their patients. And we could have got a list of vulnerable people within 5 minutes. So the way the agency would work is along the lines of how we manage biosecurity. You don't invest all the resources in Wellington. That's a coordination centre. And it actually calls upon expertise where and when it needs it to actually affect change. So if you're looking at immunisation, you'd say to the primary care networks, tell me who are the vulnerable individuals in whānau, and now we want you to contact them and we want you to immunise them. That's your job. And the distribution, you'd use things like Freightways, foodstuffs, Woolworths expertise to actually get the logistics right. So it's a matter of a network rather than a single entity.
So, Professor, are you saying they won't decide policy, they'll do logistics?
Ultimately, the direction has to come from government. The government says, we want vulnerable people vaccinated. What the agency would do then is it has a governance group which is job to oversee the implementation of that broad strategy. In other words, the government simply says our job is to say we want vulnerable people vaccinated. The agency that would take that mission would turn that into a plan and would execute that plan. And the plan would be executed like we do with biosecurity, where you say, where does the expertise sit? Who's generally good at this? And you deploy resources as you require them. So the central agency has a coordination role.
But isn't that what the Ministry of Health is doing?
No, the Ministry of Health hasn't used primary care. The Ministry of Health has not used Freightways or foodstuffs. It hasn't called upon all the resources available to it. We've actually tried to identify vulnerable people by age cohort or by saying particular diseases, but the ministry doesn't even know how many people there are in those cohorts. It doesn't even know how many vulnerable people. When it says we've vaccinated 20% or 30%, it actually doesn't know because it doesn't know what the denominator is. And the irony is primary care does. They know exactly who the vulnerable community is. They know where they are, they know how to contact them, and they know how to mobilise them.
So how would you apply this agency then to the issue of managed isolation and quarantine, right? Because at the moment we have capacity issues. Would an agency such as this determine what the capacity is and procure that, even if it's outside, even if it's private enterprise that you're buying that product from?
Absolutely. What the agency would say is, for example, to universities, if you can bring forward a plan which can bring students into the country at this level of risk, and if that involves private hotels or private facilities, we don't care. What we want to see is a plan which you can execute, which actually maintains this level of risk. So, in fact, you'd have a very broad mandate, and you'd say to people like industries, and I'm pleased to see today that there'll be some extra workers allowed in. But again, you'd invite industry to identify plans and to use whatever resources, public or private. What the agency would set as a standard of risk. It would set a standard of behaviour and it would actually audit that. But you'd have a very broad church view of how you'd go about doing that.
Aren't you contracting out government decisions then?
No, the government's decision is that it, for example, wants to immunise all the vulnerable. The government decision is that it wants to improve access to New Zealanders in and out of New Zealand, but at a certain level of risk. That's its job. The same way it does, Lisa, with all due respect for ACC and the Reserve Bank and the Super Fund. We use this model of governance all the time for operations which are quite sophisticated. The government comes, when I was on the board at ACC, the government would come and give us their views, how they wanted us to manage risk, how they wanted us to actually operate the scheme, then they'd get out of the way and allow the board to govern.
So, Professor, next week the Prime Minister has announced that she's going to unveil elements of the future plan for borders, right? When you look at that announcement, what is your number one priority for the thing that you want next week when she lays out that roadmap?
Yeah. You want plan transparency so that people can actually plan with confidence. You want to see that there is a linkage between vaccination and liberty or mobility or privilege. You want to see that there is a coordinated way in which we're going to catch up with all the vulnerable that haven't been vaccinated to date. I mean, there are still very large numbers of people in groups 1, 2 and 3 who haven't been vaccinated. And as I mentioned to you before, it's quite remarkable. The ministry actually doesn't even know how many people are in those groups. So when it quotes 30% vaccination rates and 20% vaccination rates, that's what I call a guess because they don't know. So, I mean, and we're a bit late to be guessing, I think. So I want to see planned transparency. I want to see a clear and coherent way in which the borders are opening linked to vaccination to begin with for those who are vaccinated, and beyond a certain level of vaccination, probably 80%, how we move generally towards a more open border.
Good to talk to you. That is Professor Des Gorman, Professor of Medicine at Auckland University. It is 17 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Muriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, we'll look at tonight's medal prospects. A leading economist and a tenants advocate support group support the push to view housing as a human right. The Human Rights Commission has announced an inquiry into housing, but some say the roadmap out of the crisis is already clear. Timothy Brown has more.
The Human Rights Commission has released its initial guidelines on what the right to a decent home means in Aotearoa. The Commission says successive governments share responsibility for a massive human rights failure, with the goal of an affordable, healthy home now more remote than ever for many. Economist Shamabeel Yaqub agrees it's time to recognise housing as a human right.
Totally. We've signed up to the Declaration of Human Rights, but there seems to be very little connection between those Declaration of Human Rights and how our other policies connect together. So that coordination and cohesion of our policies is not there. We're not the only ones where we're suffering these issues, but in New Zealand we have seen massive problems with the housing market.
The latest data from realestate.co.nz shows the number of houses on the market has hit a 14-year low. Shamabeel Yaqub says that is just another symptom of the ongoing housing crisis. He says the government needs to show the same political will to tackle the crisis that previous governments showed after the Second World War.
New Zealand went through this in the past. So when we had the reforms of the Second World War, after the Second World War, it was off the back of massive housing shortages, massive problems with housing. And that's why the big move to build more houses and those policies came through. I think we need to have that moment of crisis and solution again.
Ashok Jacob from Renters United agrees that the template for the sixth Labour government has already been laid out by the first Labour government.
We know what the roadmap is to get to justice and equality because we've done it before. The Labour government did it in the 1940s. You know, they built tens of thousands of houses a year. They put strict regulations on the amount of rent that you could charge. They had really high standards for what new builds and what rentals had to be. They put in all these measures because they were, at the time, seen as common sense.
He says while unwinding 4 decades of neoliberalism may not seem politically appealing, not doing so should be even more unpalatable.
It's really bad out there. The fact that masses of people are living in the awful conditions that we see in the news and people coming to us describing, it really should embarrass a government that considers itself to be social democratic and considers itself to be representing fairness and equality and justice. And the material situation on the ground is just really anything but when it comes to housing. So I'm glad that there are people talking about it as a human rights issue, because it really is.
25-year-old Wellingtonian, Kavan Wild, who's searching for his first home along with his partner, says housing has to be seen as a human right, and that should be housing that is warm, safe and affordable. At the moment, he says he's limited in accepting cold, old and mouldy stock, or housing with serious structural flaws.
I went to look at a house in Upper Hutt about probably 3 weeks to a month ago, and it was within our budget. It was small, wasn't a cross lease, which we were trying to avoid. It was ticking all our boxes, and then went through and looked at the council record on the place, and it had subsided 3 or 4 times since the 80s, so this is occurring on almost like a 10-year basis.
He says they've accepted they will need to take what they can get, though, if they want to get on the property ladder. Housing Minister Megan Woods was unavailable for an interview, but in a statement says she's acutely aware of the challenges faced by many people when it comes to accessing affordable, warm, dry, long-term housing. She says it's great the Human Rights Commission is taking an interest in housing, and the government is happy to highlight the urgent work it's already undertaking to ensure all New Zealanders have safe, warm and dry homes, like the plan to build 18,000 new Kāinga Ora homes by 2024.
Now, a few of you have been getting in touch about an earlier story on MSD allowances for people with disabilities and what happens to those allowances when they declare they're in a relationship. Some people lose them depending on how much their partners are making, and also losing payments that cover expensive medical costs. Now, this listener says clearly people should be treated as individuals when it comes to benefits and disability support. When two partners are working and just getting by and then one gets sick, they're not entitled to any support. Crazy, especially as the situation is so different if you're on ACC. Another person says it is time for the government to stay out of our bedrooms. MSD should support the individual independently of any potential partner. And this one too, the whole point of MSD should be to empower people to live a life with dignity. How is it dignified to be stripped of an independent income and forced to rely upon the income of your partner? And another person says, whoever I decide to fall in love with is no one else's business. There are concerns the country's first mass vaccination event didn't reach at-risk communities. More than 15,000 people were jabbed over 3 days in what's being lauded as a success. But a South Auckland GP says there's still a large and vulnerable community waiting for the vaccine to hit primary care clinics. Anai te kairi poata a Katie Doyle.
Staff at the country's first ever mass vaccination event are patting themselves on the back today after jabbing more than 15,500 arms in 3 days. South Auckland GP and chair of the Pacifica GP network, Dr. Api Talimatonga, says they should be proud.
It was a massive effort, and, my hat goes off to them for doing it.
But he wants to see a breakdown of who actually showed up to get the shot.
Getting the numbers up sounds impressive, but the proof of the pudding is whether we hit our equity targets in the 15,000. Were they mainly Māori and Pacifica who still lag in vaccination numbers?
Concerns about equity echoed by Emeritus Professor of Medicine Des Gorman. He applauds the mass vaccination but is anxious about the large group of vulnerable people being left behind. Professor Gorman says the answer to improving vaccination in vulnerable and hesitant groups lies in primary care.
I've met with a lot of vaccine hesitant who haven't been influenced by social media or by television campaigns, but when they get the chance for a one-on-one conversation with a clinician that they trust, it is very easy to shift them to the position where that hesitancy evaporates and they are willing to be vaccinated. So we really should have run the at-risk vaccination program through primary care.
It's something Dr. Api Talimatonga agrees with.
Every week in my clinic in South Auckland, I still have patients asking me, when are you going to start vaccinating? And when I say it may be September or later, the answer is, well, I'll just wait until you start offering it here.
Vaccinologist Helen Patoussis-Harris says the mass event was a good way to get vaccination numbers up. But there's room for improvement.
So actually having to book an appointment for a specific time isn't something that works for everybody. However, other ways to access those clinics and get in there might be more suitable. So there's sort of a whole lot of little tweaks and things that might perhaps be made for reaching as many people as possible.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff visited the clinic on the day it opened. He reckons it's another helpful piece in the jigsaw.
And it seemed to work well, and with the lessons they might have learnt from it as a pilot scheme, I'd be surprised if they didn't replicate that and do it again in the future.
Mr Goff says it's not the full answer though, with community vaccination centres still set to do most of the heavy lifting.
Christchurch's first Pacific church-based vaccination clinic has opened. More than 100 people from the Pacifica community had their first dose of the Pfizer vaccine at St Paul's Trinity Pacific Presbyterian Church over the weekend. The South Island has a growing Pacific population with at least 14,000 living in Canterbury. RNZ Pacific reporter Alicia Foon was there.
For your blessings to be twofold upon your people, particularly your servants here, Lord, as they administer this very important drug.
A quick prayer by the minister of St Paul's Trinity Pacific Presbyterian Church, kicking off the opening of the first Pacific Church-based vaccine clinic in Christchurch. More than 100 elders signed up to get their first Pfizer vaccine here. The church hall has been transformed with 6 vaccination booths, a waiting area and an observation spot.
Canterbury's longest-standing Pasifika provider, Tangata Atumotu Trust General Manager Carmen Colley says it's about accessibility and making people feel comfortable and safe.
Well, churches really are the very centre of many of our Pacific communities. There are a number of barriers to our people accessing the health system. By bringing it out into the churches, we're really bringing it into the heart of the community.
One by one, people are ushered into a booth. They get the vaccine and then they're observed for 20 minutes in case of any side effects. The observation area feels like a cafe with tea, coffee and a small lunch provided. The setup is a far cry from any clinical experience at a hospital. Around 600 to 700 people in Group 3, including the vulnerable, elderly and Pacific peoples, are expected to walk through 4 mobile church clinics like this one over the next 2 months. Being Pacifica myself and also part of Group 3, it's now my turn to walk the talk. So I'm about to get my first Pfizer vaccine and I will be among just over 1 million New Zealanders who have also had their first dose. So here goes. And just like that, about 2 seconds and it's done. Aiga, family, is everything for this community. And it's the reason why 81-year-old Seila Molipula got the vaccine.
They're visiting us every time on the weekend. And I want to be healthy when they come because I always hug them, kiss them, yeah. And they love me very much, yeah. And I'm so glad. I'm happy because the disease is so bad.
Mother of the house at St. Paul's Pacific Presbyterian, Ramona Alatimu is a face for the vaccine rollout campaigns. She feels responsibility as a church leader to encourage her community.
I know there are some of them are scared of to have a vaccine, but no, for me, I talk to them and say to them, look, I've done my 2 jab. And then I'm still here, you know, and there's nothing to scare about.
Operations lead Sulitu Taufe says despite misinformation swirling around the community, he's hopeful people are seeing through it.
With what's been happening in Fiji, I think people are really taking this seriously now, and we can prevent this by being able to have our vaccinations. So hopefully the message is out loud and clear, because we know that Pacific outcomes are the worst out of every ethnicity here in Aotearoa. So we need this to keep our communities safe.
More than 67,000 Pacific people nationwide have now had their first vaccine and will wait at least 3 weeks for their second dose.
A pizza and a lie down, that's how an elated Dame Valerie Adams is celebrating her bronze medal. It's the shot putter's 5th Olympics and her 4th medal, adding to 2 golds and a silver. Dame Valerie says this one was for her 2 children, both born since the Rio Games.
Well, I celebrated first by going to doping control for 3 hours. That was great because I was a bit dry. And then came back to the village and had some pizza and then enjoyed the medal ceremony with all my fellow Kiwis at the stadium. So it was a tremendous day. I had the opportunity to call my family whilst I was in doping control and just, you know, seeing just how proud they are, and an emotional day for all of us, and just to be able to bring this medal home, not only for Aotearoa but in particular for my 2 little bubbas.
Yeah, so when you talk to them, did they recognise themselves on the TV when you held up their photo?
They are 2 and 3, so they have no idea what the hell is going on, but I'm pretty sure that one day that they would completely understand what's just happened. So
yeah, and
I was happy enough that they were on, that they came on the screen for that they came and spoke to me for 1 second to a minute. That's pretty good for a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old.
You looked absolutely joyful yesterday. So
yeah, I was just elated. I was so super elated, and people ask me was it a relief? Are you relieved? It's actually pure elation. It felt so much more incredible than winning the gold medals. So the noise. So basically, that pure elation, because it wasn't a feeling of relief, but just pure joy and excitement, and it was just hard to describe, but everything just came out as soon as I found out I won the bronze medal.
And I know you would have been asked this, but it's just, given what you've said about how much this medal means to you, Can you explain why it means more than the gold?
Why does it mean more than a gold? I guess you can thank my two little children for that. Being able to compete as a mum this time round, to be able to go through this journey in the last 5 years. From the last Olympics to these Olympics, I've had 2 children by a C-section. To overcome the changes to my body, I have aged as well, just a fraction. So obviously, that's been a bit of a battle in itself, but to be able to come out and at an Olympic Games, which has been quite an uncertain Olympic Games for a lot of athletes, and just the pressures that has been on us to be able to perform here, I'm just super elated to be able to do that. It has been very different, but let me tell you, I drew so much inspiration from my 2 little babies, and just looking up into the stand yesterday throughout the round and imagining their little faces watching their mother. I mean, that's what would have happened in a normal world, but we're not living in a normal world right now. So that was just magical for me. Really, it was.
So your 5th Olympics, Dame Valerie, how has your perspective changed, do you reckon, in terms of what you think success looks like over the years? How's your perspective changed?
This time around, I became less selfish. You have to when you become a mother. Your priorities change as well for me, because it wasn't about me anymore. It was actually about, I'd go to training. Yes, you go get training done, and then when you go home, things continue as if doesn't matter how well or bad training went. That morning, it was just a matter of making sure that we knew how to balance things, and it puts life into perspective.
Dame Valerie, what do you reckon your next goal is?
My next goal is to go to sleep tonight for about 8 hours. That's honestly, that's my goal right now. One step at a time.
And that was Dame Valerie Adams, bronze medal winner. Tohu toa rauwhero, bronze medal. We could do with some more medals. And let's get to some of your feedback now on the RSE workers. This listener says, friends in Nelson were laid off from orchard work last year, but Tongan workers were retained. Over 100 Kiwis applied for work and most didn't get jobs last season. Why? The orchardists claw back wages in accommodation charges, and Kiwis won't put up with the hours or conditions.
RNZ News, good evening, I'm Marama Tipole. The Prime Minister says that the risk that comes with opening a one-way travel corridor to allow more seasonal workers from the Pacific is low. Cabinet has agreed to start work on the arrangement, which would see more seasonal workers travel to New Zealand from Samoa, Vanuatu and Tonga without the need to go through managed isolation. Jacinda Ardern says there is little risk, as Tonga has reported no cases of COVID-19, while Samoa's 1 and Vanuatu's 4 cases have all been at the border with no community transmission. She says officials are looking at other ways to mitigate the risk.
Things like pre-departure testing, on-arrival testing, and some mitigations at the early period of their arrival alongside their employers to ensure that we do indeed have COVID-free workers.
It's hoped the arrangement will start next month in time for the peak horticulture season. A fruit company says it's good news that seasonal workers will be allowed into the country quarantine-free, but more details are needed. The general manager of the Yummy Fruit Company, Paul Painter, has told Checkpoint the industry needs 15,000 RSE workers at its peak season, and some areas need labour now. He says employers need to get paperwork sorted before bringing workers, and authorities need to process that faster. A disabled woman says the benefit system needs an overhaul after losing her allowances since being in a relationship. Amy Bradley has muscular dystrophy and her partner earns slightly over the $1,031 weekly limit. When she declared their relationship to the Ministry of Social Development, her disability allowance and supported living benefits were cancelled weeks before he even moved in. She's told Checkpoint her medical needs are not being met.
Well, I've got no St. John's alarm because we just can't afford that per week. Yeah, we're very careful regarding heating and our power because I have a lot of medical equipment that runs off power, so I won't go to the doctors as much as probably what I should.
Amy Bradley says it's wrong that couples should have to weigh up whether it's worth to be together. The courts are getting involved in planned strike action by nurses. The union, the Nurses Organisation, has formally told district health boards its 30,000 plus members will walk off the job again for 8 hours on August the 19th. But the DHBs are taking them to the employment court first, saying they want assurances about who will be providing emergency staffing during the strike. Nurses Organisation negotiator David Waite says they were blindsided by the move. The DHBs say they just want to be certain that their hospitals can run safely during the strike. An Avocado woman whose daughter had foot surgery was encouraged to leave Dunedin Hospital early because they were understaffed. A report into the Southern DHB's safe staffing regime has found patients are at risk of harm because of a shortage of nurses. Patrina Matthews says the nursing staff were great with her daughter's surgery and recovery, but she says there weren't enough of them.
They sort of did their rounds, and on Sunday they said, well, we think you can go home, and they discussed about they're understaffed and they haven't got enough staff in the ward, and it would probably be best if we had gone home that day on Sunday, which we ended up doing.
Patrina Matthews says the government should put more money towards supporting nurses. 2 European countries have offered to help a Belarusian sprinter who was ordered home from Tokyo by her country's Olympic officials. The International Olympic Committee has said the woman is safe after seeking protection from the Japanese police. The BBC's Sarah Rainsford reports.
Kristina Tsimanovskaya has said she won't return to Belarus, scared to go back after she openly criticised her coaches. The sprinter had complained publicly about being entered into extra races in Tokyo because teammates hadn't had enough doping tests. She says she was then taken to the airport under pressure and against her will, but is now said to be safe and seeking asylum in Europe. The Belarusian Olympic Committee, in a statement, says she was being sent home because of her emotional state.
The Canterbury DHB is urging people not to use the Christchurch Hospital Emergency Department unless their condition is urgent. It says the department is extremely busy because of a significant number of patients combined with unexpected staff absences due to illness. The DHB says there are long waits for non-urgent cases. It says people with life-threatening emergencies should call 111 as usual, but people with non-urgent conditions should contact their own general practice first. The time is 4 minutes past 6. To sports now. New Zealand 49ers sailors Peter Burling and Blair Tuke will have to wait until tomorrow for the medal race as they chase a second straight Olympic gold in Tokyo. After a poor start to the regatta, they will go into the medal race at Enoshima with a 4-point lead, but today's scheduled racing has been postponed due to light winds and rescheduled for tomorrow. Having battled their way to the top of the leaderboard over the past 12 races, Burling says they go into the final in a good frame of mind.
Blair and myself are incredibly excited about getting into the medal race. It's been a pretty challenging week, but we're really excited to be wearing that gold jersey in a pretty tight field and being able to have that opportunity to put it all on the line.
Weightlifter Laurel Hubbard competes in the over 87 kg class later tonight. The eventing medals will also be decided tonight, with Tim Price in 4th place and the New Zealand team also in 4th, heading into the final show jumping phase. The track cycling program also starts with New Zealand and the women's and men's team pursuit qualifying, while the Black Sticks women play the Netherlands in the hockey quarterfinals. Earlier today, two-time winner Lisa Carrington easily won her heat of the K1 200-metre canoe sprint to advance to the semi-finals. She also advanced directly to the semi-finals of the K2 500 with Caitlin Regal after comfortably winning their heat. Alicia Hoskin and Tennille Hatton also advanced to the semis after coming through the quarterfinals in 4th spot. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dr. Serena Kelly ponders New Zealand's future ties with the European Union now the UK has left it. Fergus Barrowman's got some new jazz. Dover Samuels talks to Mihi Narangi Forbes about a lifetime in Māori politics. And our sportscaster Helene Elliott talks US sport from Tokyo, where she witnessed the dramatic end of gymnast Simone Biles' 2020 Olympic campaign firsthand. So join me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from mid-service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Showers heavy for a time tomorrow with gale southwesterlies possibly severe. Waikato to Taumaranui, also Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Showers for a time tonight and tomorrow morning. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Rain developing tonight and overnight, turning to showers tomorrow, easing late. Marlborough, north of the Kaikoura Ranges, Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Rain or showers spreading north today with snow to 500 metres in Fiordland for a time, becoming fine tomorrow. For the remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury, rain developing overnight with snow to 400 metres, easing to isolated showers late tomorrow. Otago and Southland, rain and snow lowering to 500 metres, easing to occasional showers overnight, then clearing late tomorrow. And for our friends in the Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain tonight. RNZ National, the time is 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā, e ho no mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. One of the country's best medal hopes will have to wait another day for a shot at gold. Sailors Blair Tuke and Peter Burling are in first place and are gunning for gold in the 49er. But unfavourable weather has postponed tonight's race. Our reporter Clay Wilson is at the sailing venue and joins me now. So Clay, what's going on there?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, I'm here at Inoshima Harbour, about 50 kilometres southwest of Tokyo. And for those that are watching, we'll see some flags behind me. Earlier, about an hour or so ago, those flags were flapping pretty well and looked like we were going to get some racing. But just in the last half hour, the wind has died down, and news through about 30 minutes ago that racing for today has been postponed. So what that means is another day to wait until we get to see Peter Burling and Blair Tuke go for that second gold medal. That race is going to be scheduled for 1:30 local time, 4:30 New Zealand time tomorrow, and it will come before another Kiwi in a medal race, with Josh Jr. in the Finn medal race, fourth in that division, going for a medal as well in his class. So Peter Burling and Blair Tuke sitting in first there with a 4-point buffer on second and third, and a very good chance. But as I say, the wind's not playing ball for now, and we will have to wait tomorrow to see them try and achieve those back-to-back gold medals.
So a bit of an excruciating wait for them. Lisa Carrington's made a huge statement. Bring us up to speed with her day.
Yeah, well, Lisa Carrington's taken on a huge challenge here, taking on 4 events at these Olympic Games. But we've seen what a dominant athlete she has been in this sport, and we got the first sight of it here today at these Tokyo Olympics. She was up in her specialist event first, the K1 200, a comfortable win in her heat to go straight through to the semi-final, the fastest time of anyone across the 5 heats in that class. Semi-finals tomorrow with the final also to follow tomorrow. Then we saw Carrington join Caitlin Regal in the K2 500. They won their heat to move through to those semi-finals. They're going to be tomorrow with the final as well. So potentially a couple of medal chances for Lisa Carrington and Caitlin Regal there tomorrow. Then moving forward further in the week, Lisa Carrington and Caitlin Regal both in the K1 500. That'll be Wednesday and Thursday. And then Friday and Saturday, the big boat to finish, the K4, where New Zealand will hopefully at that point be going for 4 medals in this women's canoe sprint team, which has so much class, led by Lisa Carrington.
Laurel Hubbard is also up tonight. When can people see her compete?
Yeah, well, of course, there's been so much attention on this moment, and it has arrived. Laurel Hubbard up in the women's heavyweight division of the weightlifting tonight, and she's going to go at about 10:50 New Zealand time, so you will have to stay up a little bit later to see this, but everything's going to happen tonight. We're going to have qualifying, and then the medals will be dished out. Laurel Hubbard has 9 other rivals in this division, but of course she's very much considered a medal contender, and those medals will be dished out tonight. So no doubt, whatever happens tonight, there's set to be plenty of reaction overnight and into tomorrow about Laurel Hubbard's performance and just what she pulls off as she makes history as the first transgender Olympian here in Tokyo.
Thanks, Clay. It is going to be a late night. That is Clay Wilson joining us from the sailing venue. And as he said, if you were listening rather than watching, a few flags in the background, barely fluttering, not enough wind. So Blair Tuke and Peter Burling are going to have to wait until tomorrow. Patients are at risk of harm as a shortage of nurses on Southern District Health Board wards forces them to ration their care. The problem was unearthed as part of a review into its safe staffing regime. Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Katie Simmons is on her 5th stay at Dunedin Hospital this year with her daughter who has underlying health issues. She's been helping care for her daughter to ease the pressure on nursing staff.
Like sponging her down, just stripping her bed, making, doing that. because she's no weight bearing for 6 weeks, getting her to and from the toilet where, you know, some parents ask the nurses for help, you know, just for those kinds of things where I'm able to, you know, sort of do that without needing to, you know, get the nurses to show me or help me.
Walking around the ward yesterday, Ms Simmons says the nursing station was always empty. She can't fault the staff who have provided great care while short-staffed.
You could just tell that they were so busy, you know, they were probably lucky if they were actually able to get a break. You know, you can see the tired look on their faces and they're, you know, doing their best, and what are they supposed to do, you know? It must be really hard for them.
The Southern DHB commissioned a review into its safe staffing regime as part of its Care Capacity Demand Management program. It found one Dunedin hospital ward was regularly understaffed by 20% or more during day shifts between July 2018 and October 2020. The report's author, Jane Lawless, says all patients are exposed to risk when shifts are understaffed, and shortages mean nurses have to decide which tasks will be sacrificed or prioritised, rationing their care.
A person who needs assistance to mobilise may not get helped to do that during the shift. So the consequences don't seem very immediate, but that person may not make a full recovery because that was actually a really important thing to happen. It's things like the prompt attention to dealing with someone's noxious symptoms like their pain or their anxiety.
Often decisions on what gets prioritised are made in the moment. The report recommends the DHB focuses on eliminating understaffing on shifts, which Jane Lawless says may require a national mandated system like the nurse-to-patient ratios in Australia.
There will always be more people needing care. There will always be more to do than we can do. But the point is, if we enter a patient into our health system, we have to be able to say that we're going to be able to provide what they require.
The Southern DHB says the report was commissioned following concerns it wasn't achieving its outcomes, despite significant investments in nursing and midwifery staffing over recent years. Hiring additional staff remains a major hurdle. The DHB says the recommendations will help it respond better to workload pressures, along with plans to boost nursing funding this financial year. The report will be presented at a Southern DHB meeting tomorrow.
It's 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Plans for a massive water take to grow more avocados in the far north could get the green light in the coming weeks, but there's major concern among some locals about what that will mean for the environment. An application to take billions of litres from Te Aupuri aquifer, which sits right at the top of the Motu, is currently being considered by independent commissioners. A decision is expected next month, and while there's been opposition from the Department of Conservation and many in the community, those wanting the water say the environment is their primary concern too. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Heading up State Highway 1 past Kaitaia, the view's changed a lot in recent years. Former paddocks are now covered with bright windbreaks, protecting tens of thousands of avocado trees, stretching as far as the eye can see. Ian Broadhurst knows a lot about that conversion. He's been growing avocados in the far north for more than 30 years and is now the manager at Mapua Orchard, the country's biggest grower, which has around 100,000 trees.
In recent times there would have been a good 550 hectares of avocados gone in. I would say that of that 500 hectares, 450 hectares of that was ex-dairy farm. So there's definitely dairying has been in the decline, and horticulture's picked that up.
While he's been in the area for decades, it's the past 4 years, he says, have been truly transformational.
I heard the other day that I think there's 30 fishing boats used to work out of Pukenui, out of Hauhora Harbour. There's 2 now, so there's been big changes. So horticulture is the big winner in all of this.
That conversion has seen huge money pumped into avocados.
Of the 500 hectares, I think probably the average price for land was around about $25,000 per hectare. The way we grow avocados now, it's probably $100,000 per hectare investment in terms of planting and establishing, putting all the infrastructure in. It'll easily be a $50 million investment.
and more people want in on the action. An application by 24 landowners to take 6.2 million cubic metres of water each year is currently being considered by independent commissioners on behalf of the Northland Regional Council. That water will come from the Opodi Aquifer, an ancient water source which sits under the peninsula. While not all applicants want the water for avocados, the majority do. There's plenty of concern about what's at stake.
I think if you talk to people, you will hear many stories of there used to be water there. You know, people that have lived in these areas for a long time. There used to be water there, now there isn't. My bore's dried up. I've never seen this in my lifetime, and I've talked to a lot of local people. I've talked to people that have been working in the orchards that have come to me. They are worried that they don't want to talk about it because they're going to lose their job. Totally understand. They're between a rock and a hard place. There's got to be another way that we can help the aquifer, because if they keep drilling and doing what they're doing and developing, something's going to go, and it's going to be saltwater intrusion.
Karen Nikora Kerr lives near Ngātaki, an area where avocado growth has been massive. She says there are other ways of growing the fruit, without sprays, for example, but she has huge concerns about what's happening at the moment.
If you look at avocados and the way that it's been put up, there are many people just starting to realise that how big it actually is. They're worried about these big orchard owners that have come and developed, and they want this water consent because now they will sell what they've created, make money. They don't live here. They're going to go away. What if something happens to the water? I can't say it's going to. They can't say it isn't. Our council's mentality, the risks will be no more than minor. You can read it in a million bits of paperwork of theirs. They cannot prove that.
She's opposing the latest water take application, as she did a previous one, which was granted in 2019. That take for more than 2 million cubic metres a year was eventually granted after the Department of Conservation appealed against it. The case went to the Environment Court, which backed the decision for the water to be taken. However, checks were put in place to monitor usage and adjust where necessary. But locals say they're still feeling the effects. John Johnson lives near Waiharara with a wetland on his property and avocado orchards for neighbours.
I'd prefer to have dairy because from what I've experienced, dairy is far less invasive on the environment than the avocados.
The avocados have had a huge effect on the area.
From what I'd been told by the growers, they're going to be organic and it's going to be fantastic. Well, there was nothing like that. The intensive industrial monoculture they do, which is known throughout the world, the intensive spraying, the artificial fertilisers, the injecting the trees to stop the Phytophthora. It's like avocados, junky avocados, you know, and if people knew, I think, what grows into growing industrial avocados, they wouldn't eat them. I don't eat local avocados because I know what goes into them.
While Johnson says things have improved from what he describes as the Wild West days of early avocado growth, he still has grave concerns over the latest water take.
The horse has bolted, really. It should have been stopped in 2018 when Environment Court said this water take shouldn't go ahead. But because there's so much money being sunk into the avocado industry now, it's beyond stopping. It's too big for council or anyone to stop. So it's tragic. It should never have gone ahead, but it's too late now.
For local landowner Alan Nuns, the water plans come with huge risks, particularly ocean water leaking into the aquifer as it's drained.
The aquifer is basically a fossil aquifer, the deep aquifer, so it's been there for quite a long time. And it's a very precious resource, and it's a fragile resource because if it's overexploited, then you'll get quite easily seawater intrusion, seawater coming into the aquifer from either the Tasman or the east side, most likely the east side, because of the way the basement goes. So obviously the aquifer is being used at the moment, both for farming for residential use and also for avocado farming. But the scale of these permits is what concerns me.
Nuns has a lot of technical knowledge in this space. He has a PhD in marine geophysics and says the information the application is based on just doesn't go far enough.
We don't know enough at this point to start draining the aquifer at the volumes that they're talking about.
He estimates the planned water take is enough to sustain about 73,000 people each year. Currently, about 4,000 people live in the area. Nuns wants other economic development to be considered for the area to make it more diverse.
It's wonderful that Opuri Peninsula turned out to be such a wonderful place to grow avocados, and it has been good. And there's a lot of people up there who are doing it very sustainably and very carefully. But I'd prefer to see a more diversified form of agriculture and other business there than just have the whole peninsula covered with avocados.
But those wanting the water say the sustainability of the aquifer is vital to them too, and they won't be doing anything to endanger it. Martel Letica is the planning consultant representing the 24 applicants. She's been working on the issue for the past few years and says the science is thorough and there are checks and balances to protect the water source.
If we get to those trigger levels, there is a response mechanism available. To me, yes, the stakes are high, but the responses that are in the contingency plan are very severe.
She says the applicants, including 3 hapu, are kaitiaki of the whenua, and they want the water to be used as carefully as anyone else. She says the boost this has had for the community has been massive.
I think back to when I used to drive down the main street of Kaitaia, and now I drive down the main street of Kaitaia, and it is booming. You know, compare that to Kaikohe. Kaitaia and Kaikohe to me were very much quite similar in their townscapes. And now, like, Kaitaia's has the Te Ahuahu Centre. They've got this revitalisation project that's going on with their reserves areas. It's a vibrant community.
Maria Mino Kapakingi is the Chief Executive for Te Runanga Nui o Te Aupōuri, which is the largest applicant for this take. She says they're still finding out how avocados are affecting the area.
We need to know more to be able to understand completely whether that is so. So instincts are that's a whole lot of trees, that's a whole lot of avocado trees. But equally, I can see all of our whānau, that's where they've got their job. They want to live on their own whenua and they want to live in the north. You know, so that's a tick as far as I'm concerned. That's a positive thing. So can those things exist together, and can we know more to actually make better decisions about whether the aquifer will be negatively affected for the future? I need to know more. I need to understand that better. And I don't know whether we do, I've got to say.
Hami Piripi chairs Te Runanga o Te Rarawa. He says avocados have absolutely been a force for good in the north. While he says Te Rarawa doesn't have plans for avocado growing at this stage, he trusts the science around the water take.
The biggest fallacy, I think, is the extent to which avocados need in terms of water. Is a huge fallacy. People just think because they see a tree and that it takes more water, but actually it takes a lot less water than a cow. And I found that knowledge very, very empowering in terms of how we consider the issues. So yeah, we're a part of this region's development, and we're happy to develop along the right track, and according to the science, this track is okay.
One of the loudest voices opposed to the water application is the Department of Conservation, which is concerned about the effects on local wetlands and lakes, which are home to threatened species. DOC says taking water from the aquifer will compromise an important habitat, and they're concerned the applicants haven't been able to show how the adverse effects of this proposal will be avoided. For now, the future of the aquifer lies with independent commissioners who've been tasked with considering all sides of this debate. Karen Nikora-Kerr says she's expecting it will get the green light, but she's not happy about it.
If this goes through, then that tells me that the process with the system doesn't work, because 2 hearings, I'm going to say taxpayers' money being used, because if DOC appeals and goes to the Environment Court, which it did, and then Environment Court gives a decision, and then the councils and the applicants and everyone doesn't listen, what does that mean? How do you move on? Because it's just going to keep happening.
A decision over the highly contentious and heated issue is looming. It's expected to be delivered before the end of August.
A massive outdoor music festival is being held in Chicago in what city officials believe is a textbook example of a COVID-safe event. It's also being seen as a big vote of confidence in the power of America's 3 vaccines to protect its population. The ABC's Greg Jennett reports.
In Grant Park, Chicago, Post Malone made up for lost time. Last year's Lollapalooza Music Festival was cancelled.
Every day for the last year and a half has been a kick in the ass, and I just want to say thank you to each and every single one of y'all for coming out tonight, man.
And this year, for over an hour, the rapper, singer and songwriter gave his audience far more than he was allotted to give. In front of him stood an estimated crowd of 100,000, mostly young music lovers, very few masks and even less distance between them. Lollapalooza, or Lolla as it's known locally, is a test of model preparations in a quest for normality within a highly vaccinated cohort.
I feel very good about what we've done.
And yet, as Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot's acknowledged, it could still be a leap into the unknown.
Obviously, we'll know a little bit more in a week to 10 days. But we have to keep pushing the fact that the unvaccinated are the people that are at risk.
Far from a potential super spreader event, Mayor Lightfoot holds the Lollapalooza Festival out as an artistic advertisement to the unvaccinated of all the good that can come from a couple of injections.
90% of the people that are in Lolla are vaccinated. I understand the fascination with Lolla, but the fact is, in this city, because of the efforts that we've made to get people vaccinated, we've been able to open, but do it with care.
And it just might work too.
It's a tipping point now.
Dr. Francis Collins is the head of America's premier public research agency, the National Institute of Health, above the higher profile Anthony Fauci. On the figures Dr. Collins is seeing and likes, the project to convince unvaccinated Americans that they're in a pandemic that's almost unique to them might just be working.
In Louisiana, vaccination rates have gone up threefold.
And Francis Collins has a hunch that the unfettered spread of the Delta variant in particular states, including Louisiana, Florida and Texas, is its own motivator.
That's what desperately needs to happen if we're going to get this Delta variant put back in its place, because right now it's having a pretty big party in the middle of the country.
Make that two raging parties in America's middle. The other is the supposedly safe one. The vaccinated are meant to be living each and every day.
Right, that's almost us, but remember, ko te kaupapa tuatahi o pōpō. Tune in for First Up bright and early tomorrow morning to hear whether Kiwi weightlifter Laurel Hubbard succeeds in her bid to win gold in Tokyo overnight. Kia pai tōpō, have a wonderful night. Ko hoki mai anō mātou a pōpō. We'll be back same time tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Yummy Fruit Company is welcoming news that RSE seasonal workers from Samoa, Tonga and Vanuatu will be allowed in quarantine-free, but says more details are needed. The electric vehicle rebate is boosting vehicle sales. They're up 23% on a year ago. Christchurch Hospital's ED is at full stretch. The DHB is urging people not to use it unless their condition is urgent. At the Olympics, 49er sailors Peter Burling and Blair Tuke's gold medal bid is on hold for 24 hours because of light winds. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Pacific Waves, delving deeper into the major Pacific stories of the week in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the region and the world. I bring you interviews with Pacific newsmakers, experts and commentators in their fields, as well as up-to-date coverage from our talented team here at RNZ Pacific and our correspondents on the ground in the region. Pacific Waves, 8:15 weeknights on RNZ National.
Looking forward to that, Karoi. I'm Brian Crump, by the way, getting ready for another night on RNZ National, where we'll also keep you in touch with any major goings-ons in the Olympics in Tokyo during our shift.